I don't think it's going to take 10 minutes to disprove the existence of God. The main reason for this, I think, is that it is a totalitarian belief. It is the wish to be a slave. It is the desire that there be an unalterable, unchallengeable, tyrannical authority who can convict you of thought crime while you are asleep, who can subject you, who must indeed subject you, to a total surveillance around the clock, every waking and sleeping minute of your life, I say of your life, before you're born, and even worse, and where the real fun begins, after you're dead. A celestial North Korea. Who wants this to be true? Who but a slave desires such a ghastly fate? And then around 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, but only in really barbaric, illiterate parts of the Middle East. Not in China or where people can read or think or do science. No. In barbaric, illiterate, backward parts of the Middle East, it's decided we can't let this go on, we better intervene. And what better way than by human sacrifices and plagues and mass murder? And if that doesn't make them behave morally, we just don't know what does. If there is a single person in this room who can bring themselves to believe anything remotely like that, they convict themselves of being, first, very stupid, and second, very immoral. And thus, it seems to me that the case for divine intervention and for the supernatural falls, and that we should be glad that it's full.
It's not every day that you see two brothers debating the existence of God, but when those brothers are Christopher Hitchens and Peter Hitchens, you know it's going to be a fierce intellectual battle. Christopher Hitchens, the renowned atheist and author of God Is Not Great, was one of the most vocal and relentless critics of religion in modern times. His brother Peter Hitchens, a journalist and Christian thinker, took the opposite stance, defending the necessity of faith, morality, and God's existence. So does faith enslave us, or does it provide the foundation for freedom and morality? Let's dive into one of the most intense and thought-provoking debates on God, morality, and the fate of civilization.
Thank you for spirited debate on our first topic. By prior agreement, the second topic concerns God. The proposition is, God does not exist and he is not great. A historical note, exactly 80 years ago, back in 1928, Clarence Darrow debated a similar proposition within these walls. Well, since Peter went first on the previous question, Christopher will go first on this one. Christopher, 10 minutes.
You mean you're ready for another burst from CH. There's something wrong with this coin toss business. Okay, let me see. I don't think it's going to take 10 minutes to disprove the existence of God. The atheist proposition is the following. Most of the time, it may not be said that there is no God. It may be said that there is no reason to think that there is one. That was the situation after Lucretius and Democritus and the original anti-theistic thinkers began their critique of religion. And I would just ask you all, ladies and gentlemen, to bear in mind a mild distinction while we go on. You may wish to be a deist, as my heroes Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine were, and you may not wish to abandon the idea that there must be some sort of first or proximate cause or prime mover of the known and observable world and universe. But even if you can get yourself to that position, which we unbelievers maintain is always subject to better and more perfect and more elegant explanations, even if you can get yourself to that position, all your work is still ahead of you. To go from being a deist to a theist, in other words, from someone who says, God cares about you, knows who you are, minds what you do, answers your prayers, cares which bits of your penis or clitoris you saw away or have sawn away for you, minds who you go to bed with and in what way, mine's what holy days you observe, mine's what you eat, mine's what positions you use for pleasure, all your work is still ahead of you, and lots of luck. Because there's nobody, even Aquinas had to give it up. There's no one who can move from the first position to the second. So I could, and I'm actually strongly tempted to, I could leave it right there. But then it's not in my nature to let off a captive audience so easily. So I'll add a couple of things. The reasons why I am glad this is not true would, I suppose, be the gravamen of my case. Some people I know who are atheists will say they wish they could believe it. Some people I know who are former believers say they wish they could have their old faith back. They miss it. I don't understand this at all. I think it's an excellent thing that there's no reason to believe in the absurd propositions I just, admittedly rather briefly, rehearsed to you. The main reason for this, I think, is that it is a totalitarian belief. It is the wish to be a slave. It is the desire that there be an unalterable, unchallengeable, tyrannical authority who can convict you of thought crime while you are asleep, who can subject you, who must indeed subject you, to a total surveillance around the clock, every waking and sleeping minute of your life, I say of your life, before you're born, and even worse, and where the real fun begins, after you're dead. A celestial North Korea. Who wants this to be true? Who but a slave desires such a ghastly fate? I've been to North Korea. It has a dead man as its president. Kim Jong-il is only head of the party and head of the army. He's not head of the government or the state. That office belongs to his deceased father, Kim Il-sung. It's a necrocracy, a thanatocracy. It's one short of a trinity, I might add. The son is the reincarnation of the father. It is the most revolting and utter and absolute and heartless tyranny the human species has ever evolved. But at least you can fucking die and leave North Korea. Does the Quran or the Bible offer you that liberty? No. No. The tyranny, the misery, the utter ownership of your entire personality, the smashing of your individuality only begins at the point of death. This is evil. This is a wicked preachment. So that's the first thing. Second, it attacks us in our deepest, most essential integrity. It's an insult to us in other ways. It says that we, you and I, could not, individually or collectively, decide upon a right action or a right thing without celestial divine permission. We would not know right from wrong if we did not have heaven's permission to do so. Where else, how else could we know? Our human solidarity, our innate knowledge of right and wrong, our acute awareness of what is fair and what is unfair, what is just and worthless to us, these come to us also as gifts from the great unassailable dictator enthroned. What could abolish our integrity? What could abolish our honesty, our decency, our dignity more than that? The third, is a little more pragmatic. Religion is our first, that's why I'm so fascinated with it, it's our first version of the truth. It's our first attempt as a species. It's what we tried when we didn't know anything. We didn't know we lived on a spherical planet. We didn't know that our planet revolved around the sun. We didn't know that there were microorganisms that explained disease. We thought diseases came from curses or witches or ill-wishing or devils or dust devils. We didn't know anything from the childish, terrified, ignorant origins of our animal primate species. We come to religion. It's also our first attempt at philosophy, our first attempt at morality, our first attempt at healthcare, actually, but because it was our first, it is our worst. We now have better explanations for all these dreads, and we have cleared up all of these mysteries, yet we still dwell and in some countries, in some societies, not just dwell, but live under a totalitarian regime that forbids us to think about the progress that has been made or denies us the knowledge that these advances have in fact occurred. So it has become, where once it probably was an aid to our survival, a really great peril to our continued ability to live as a civilized species. Thus, it seems to me that in point of its proposing of a totalitarian solution to what is, after all, a real problem, to its ghastly reliance upon the supernatural rather than the much more miraculous, much more beautiful, much more elegant, much more numinous, much more harmonious natural explanations. Think how much lovelier Einstein and Darwin are. Think how much more elegant and persuasive they are than the idea of the burning bush, or the demand that without circumcision there can be no redemption. Just picture it. And then I'll give you one final thought experiment. This is what you have to believe now, if you're a monotheist. Because we now know things we didn't used to know. We know that the human species could be as much as 200,000 years ago. It becomes separate from the Cro-Magnons and the rival pre-human species. Could be as little as 100. Richard Dawkins thinks 200,000. Francis Collins, who did the Human Genome Project, who's, by the way, C.S. Lewis kind of Christian, thinks 100,000. All right, I'll take 100. I'll take 100. Here's what you have to believe. For 100,000 years, humans are born as a primate species. Expectation of life, what, 25 years for the first few 100,000 years? First few tens of thousands of years. Infant mortality, rife. Microorganism disease, terrifying. Earthquakes, volcanoes, extraordinary. And fights over land, over territory, over food, over women, over tribalism. Frightening too. For 95, 96,000 years, heaven watches this. With folded arms, with indifference, with coldness. And then around 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, but only in really barbaric, illiterate parts of the Middle East. Not in China or where people can read or think or do science. No. In barbaric, illiterate, backward parts of the Middle East, it's decided we can't let this go on, we better intervene. And what better way than by human sacrifices and plagues and mass murder? And if that doesn't make them behave morally, we just don't know what does. If there is a single person in this room who can bring themselves to believe anything remotely like that, they convict themselves of being, first, very stupid, and second, very immoral. And thus, it seems to me that the case for divine intervention and for the supernatural falls, and that we should be glad that it's fallen. And thank you.
Christopher Hitchens was undoubtedly a skilled debater and a master of rhetoric. But in this exchange, his argument against God relied more on mockery than substance. Rather than presenting a logical or philosophical case for atheism, he resorted to ridicule and emotional appeals, likening God to a celestial North Korea and dismissing religion as primitive superstition. While his speech was entertaining, it failed to engage with the real intellectual foundations of theism. Instead of addressing philosophical arguments for God's existence, such as the cosmological, moral, or design arguments, Christopher simply caricatured religious belief as slavery to a tyrant. This is not an argument, but rather an expression of personal distaste. His focus on religious extremism, circumcision, and outdated cultural practices ignored the core questions of God's existence, morality, and the meaning of life. By dismissing faith as wish thinking, he ignored his own burden of proof as an atheist. He never demonstrated why a universe without God makes more sense than one with God, leaving his case more about derision than reasoned discourse. While entertaining, his speech did little to actually challenge the intellectual foundations of Christianity. Unlike his brother, Peter Hitchens was once an atheist, but later returned to Christianity after deep reflection. As a former Marxist, he believed in secularism until he witnessed the moral decay of godless societies. A pivotal moment came when he saw the Last Judgment painting, which confronted him with the reality of divine justice. In contrast to Christopher's ridicule, Peter approached faith with intellectual depth and seriousness. His argument highlighted the moral consequences of abandoning Christianity and emphasized that belief in God provides order, purpose, and truth, offering a far more reasoned and substantial perspective than his brother's emotional dismissal of faith.
Peter, 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Yeah. Well, I can tell you're all enjoying the post-Saddam era, which we were told was so good. I wonder whether an invasion of the celestial regions might now be in order, and we could then have a post-God era, which would be of similar delightful quality. I am amazed, when confronted with this argument, how little my brother seems to know of that which he attacks, how he prefers to mock and belittle, how he prefers to select from it all those things which I think most educated believers themselves are troubled by, how he imagines that people other than himself do not seem ever to have been troubled by the things which trouble him, and nonetheless have come to the conclusion, despite all, that belief in a God, in my case, God, call him by his first name, that belief in God is nonetheless wise, beneficial, and good, not just for ourselves, but for the universe. If only the, how shall I say, the flippant, jeering tone could be abandoned for a moment, and we could discuss this more seriously. It seems to me to be incurious to the point of tedium to examine the universe and not to ask yourself certain very powerful questions. The first of which is, why is there something rather than nothing? The second of which is, since we do not know anything at all about our origins and must work out what we think we know from extremely scanty evidence, that it would be unwise to form absolute certainties on this. Now, the character of the book, God is Not Great, which my brother wrote, is one entirely of the jeering, the mocking, the caricature, the picking out of that which is bad.
What?
I do not
Stop
think...
that. Stop
I do
that.
not think that this... Sorry, did you wish to intervene?
No, sorry.
Please.
Telling him not to.
You sure? I mean, I did no. This,
Stop,
absolutely.
Stop that.
No, right. That's the end of the Christian
No
charity
more
for
clapping,
the moment.
please,
Had it been couched, of course, in a more generous tone, it would have been less fun to do, and who knows, there might have been other consequences in the bookshops, I don't know. But since it wasn't couched in that tone, that is what we have to argue with. And I would simply say this. First of all, for a while, I'm surprised he hasn't asked it tonight, my brother would go around saying that there was a question which no believer could answer about what action could no believer take which an unbeliever could, or something of that character. To which I would reply, the question of morality is utterly irrelevant to you if you genuinely believe that which you say you believe. If you think that there is no authority, if you think that we are the products of random chaos, if there is no reason for the existence of the universe apart from a series of accidents, then you may behave exactly as you wish. Now, in the case of Christopher and his ally and colleague, Professor Dawkins, I refer to this as luxury atheism. I know where they live. They live in very pleasant parts of very pleasant cities, and they are able to advance the theory of atheism purely as a theory. Well, I live in England, and I don't need to travel very far from my home, which is not far from Professor Dawkins' home, in Oxford, to find a large number of highly practical atheists. In my country, it is common, no more than 3 or 4 times a week, to read accounts of people being kicked to death by youths aged between about 13 and 17. It invariably ends with the phrase, "and then they started kicking his head as if it were a football." These accounts grow more and more common. If you venture into the areas where these people live, you will find a complete absence of any kind of moral feeling whatsoever, a complete absence of self-government among the strong, among the healthy, among those who are able to control and take advantage of their neighbors. Christianity and everything that went with it have vanished from among them. They are practical atheists, and they really mean it. In fact, in some ways, they're not atheists. If you examine my country carefully, you'll find that the worship of Moloch, the slaughter of children at the rate of 180,000 a year in the womb, continues, that the worship of Mammon is out of control, that the worship of Ashtaroth is pretty well advanced as well, and a number of the other pagan gods. They're way out in front of the dear old Anglican Jehovah in whom I attempt to believe. All this seems to me to point to an important factor in religion, which is why it seems to me that it is reasonable, given that we are ignorant of the answer as to whether there is or is not a God and cannot know, why we might reasonably think that it was worth believing in such a being. If the universe does have an order, if it does have an origin, if there is running through it an eternal law, then wouldn't it be a good idea to try to find out what it was and to seek to govern ourselves by it? Now, I too have been to North Korea, and I will tell you that I have the opposite impressions to that which my brother had. This is a country entirely run by people who hate and despise the idea of God and who have made themselves into gods. And that, indeed, is what so very often happens when people ignore the very, very earliest part of the Bible, in which the serpent says to Adam and Eve, "Eat of this fruit, and ye shall be as gods." This is what we do when we decide for ourselves that there is nothing above us. We destroy authority. We destroy all the things which turn the hearts of the disobedient to the wisdom of the just. They're going very rapidly in my country. I suspect that if things proceed as they are in our educational system and our trash culture, they will happen pretty rapidly in this one too. And then you will know what happens when God is truly absent, not because he isn't there, but because the only place he can occupy lies within our hearts. And either he is there because we invite him and we seek his assistance in the governing of ourselves, or he is not, and we cease to be able to govern ourselves because we no longer know how to do so. There are many forms of morality. I'm told that human solidarity is a way of running the world. Well, up to a point it is. But the problem with human solidarity is that it operates at different levels. And when I lived for some years in Moscow, it was folly to expect anyone to hold open a door in the Moscow metro. Big, heavy steel and glass doors they were too, because nobody there knew anything about manners. They let the thing swing back in your face. And if I ever held the door open for somebody else, as I did in my naive early weeks in that city, they'd look at me as if I were mad. Now, something similar has begun to happen to me in Britain. I'm walking down the aisle of a crowded train, and I see somebody coming the other way, struggling with luggage, and I think, well, I'll step out of the way and let them pass. Well, increasingly, the people behind me think I'm having a heart attack, so they barge past me. The breakdown of general assumptions about what is good affects the way that everybody behaves. You cannot have a private morality for very long if the public morality is declining. And I say there are three stages of this. The whole is solipsistic. I will do what I want when there's nothing but left and right. And left is that way, this way, and it's the other way if I turn around. And then there's what you might call the shipboard morality, where there's port and starboard and there's fore and aft, but they change when the ship moves. And then there's the universal one, which flows from the universe, where there is true north, and where there is no difference ever about which is right and which is wrong, and which is the root of all authority. The authority of the state, which places power under the law. The authority of the family, where the parents rule the children. The authority of the country, where the people govern themselves under a law which all accept. All these things derive from that understanding. Without it, we're lost. Why sneer at it? Why seek to bring it down? Why mock it? Why make silly jokes about circumcision? This is far more important than that. I really do wish he'd treat it seriously for once.
Peter Hitchens delivered a compelling moral critique of atheism, effectively demonstrating its societal consequences. However, he did not directly refute Christopher Hitchens' philosophical objections to theism. To strengthen the case for Christianity, let's address these gaps. Christopher Hitchens painted a one-distorted picture of God, equating divine justice with one oppressive dictatorship. However, this is a category error. God is not a dictator. He is a just and loving judge who gives humans free will. C.S. Lewis, in Mere Christianity, explains that true morality requires an objective moral lawgiver. A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. Christopher's analogy fails because human dictators impose arbitrary laws to serve themselves, whereas God's laws are rooted in love and justice. The Bible presents God as a father, not a tyrant. Matthew 7:11. Instead of a thought police, God respects our free will, as seen in Deuteronomy 30:19. I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life. Christopher claimed that science has made religion obsolete. Yet this ignores the limits of science. Science explains how the universe works, but cannot answer why it exists. John Lennox, in God's Undertaker, Has Science Buried God? States, far from science having buried God, not only do the results of science point towards his existence, but the scientific endeavor itself is validated by the Christian worldview. Many of history's greatest scientists, including Isaac Newton, Johannes Kepler, and Francis Collins, were devout theists. If science truly disproved God, why were so many of its pioneers believers? Christopher mocked Christianity's origins as arising from barbaric, illiterate cultures. This is intellectually dishonest. The Judeo-Christian tradition revolutionized morality, giving us the ideas of human rights, the value of the individual, and justice for the oppressed. Tom Holland, in Dominion, How the Christian Revolution Remade the World, argues that Christianity was the moral foundation for Western civilization. It is the principal reason why, by and large, most of us who live in post-Christian societies still take for granted that it is nobler to suffer than to inflict suffering. Christopher ignored how Christianity uplifted women, abolished slavery, and promoted education. Hardly the work of an ignorant or regressive belief system. God is just, not a dictator. Science and faith are compatible. Christianity shapes civilization for the better. We fortify the case for Christianity and expose the flaws in the atheist worldview. These ideas are explored further in books like Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis. God's Undertaker, Has Science Buried God? John Lennox. Dominion, How the Christian Revolution Remade the World. Tom Holland.